The views of the guest are that of the guests and do not represent nor reflect the views and opinions of the Lockoutmen channel, the Recruiter Call channel, nor its host. This site content is for entertainment, educational, and informational purposes only.
So there was a comment that was made in a previous video. I did the story on the truck driver, the 54-year-old truck driver that was literally having a stroke while being improperly called out as under the influence. Guys, go back and check out that video. But in that video, this comment came through, and I want to talk about it.
Before we get started, does anyone want to get out?
What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Thank you for listening. I am Lockoutmen, and today I'm just going to do a quick response to a comment that came through on one of my previous videos. Now, a medical condition, whether you can see it or not, still need a medical provider, i.e. an ambulance or any medical personnel, to come out and make sure that we are okay. Now, in the article, the driver crashed into another vehicle. Now, nobody was in that vehicle, but when the police came to investigate the situation, they assumed that this driver was on some type of drugs because he was incoherent and the police was like he was all over the place. Well, in actuality, he was having a stroke. And sometimes when people have strokes, you could probably tell, and then you probably can't tell. Let's listen to what this commenter had to say.
Pardon my skepticism, but dude didn't behave like he was having a stroke. He's standing fully upright, answering the officer rather coherently, and obeying instructions. If he was truly impaired by a medical condition, he should have sat or laid down and told the officer he didn't feel right and asked for an ambulance. I doubt he gets the award.
Okay, so let me get this straight. You're a
neurologist.
Now, if I'm pronouncing that right. Neurologist?
Neurologists.
Neurologist?
Neurologists.
I can't pronounce it. I'll probably get Google to pronounce it for me.
Neurologists.
Tell me how exactly, right, is a person supposed to act when they're having a stroke, right? Because let me side note for a minute. I did mention the fact that my own mother was having a stroke. Now, the way she was acting was totally different from the way the driver was acting, right? She was acting weird to me, okay? Now, even though this particular driver wasn't acting as such, I don't know what it means in your comment, though. You think every stroke victim just collapse on the ground and start convulsing? Let me hit you with a news flash, bro. Stroke affects people differently. Some, like this truck driver here, he remained standing. Some try to speak, but struggle, like my mother. And many don't even realize what's happening to them in the moment. But you're out here judging a medical emergency like it's a performance you don't find convincing enough. The dude was slurring, visibly disoriented, and clearly in distress. But again, the office of the goddamn law, instead of getting medical help, they just jump straight in and think he was on something. That was the whole problem, bruh. But again, go ahead and keep playing doctor from your keyboard. Some of you guys in the comments say that sometimes the officers can't tell the difference between a person having a stroke and a person being up under the influence. I guess I can understand your take on that, but still, after the crash, the driver still should have been looked at by a medical professional, i.e. an ambulance. Somebody should have came out there to make sure that driver was all right, even after an accident, bro. Only thing that officer did was just took his demeanor as being up under the influence. Not to mention that they threw the man in jail for 27 hours, and while he was in jail, he was still sick, urinating on himself, sitting in his cell for 27 hours in his own bodily fluid, bro. It wasn't up until the sister called him up to say, hey, can you go in there and check on my brother and make sure he's all right? And then they finally go in there and they see this man sitting in his own bodily fluids. Then they decide to send him to the hospital, only to find out that he was having a stroke all that time. That's what I'm talking about here. Now, it's understandable that the officer could misdiagnose it as him being under the influence, okay? But even after that, it was the fact that they didn't care. They didn't do nothing to see if this man was all right. They didn't do nothing for his health. And they just let him be there for 27 hours. That's the whole fact of the matter comes into play. Not because he was misdiagnosed as being under the influence and being arrested. It was just the fact that he was still sick, and nobody for 27 hours until the sister called to have somebody to go check on this man to see what's going on, which they should have did. They had plenty of time to get this man medical attention. If they didn't get it at the time of the accident and the arrest, they had plenty of time to get it when they got him to the station. During intake, somebody had to talk to him to get the information. During intake, they had to fingerprint him. They had to get his information. And you mean to tell me during that time, nobody didn't see anything was wrong with this driver, and they still thought that he was under the influence? Don't they have medical personnel at the jail? At the time of intake, they didn't bother to get their own medical personnel to make sure this guy was all right before they put him in jail? That's what I'm talking about. Nobody did that. I'm not talking about the arrest. I'm not talking about the officer not knowing the situation that he was in. I'm talking about all the opportunities they had afterwards. I'm sure throughout the night they have somebody to go and make sure that everybody is all right. He'd been in jail for 27 hours. That means somebody had to bring him breakfast, somebody had to bring him lunch, and somebody had to bring him dinner. So you mean to tell me for 27 hours while he was in jail, nobody bothered to wonder why maybe the food wasn't ate? Because if this man's sitting in his own bodily fluids, what makes you think he's going to eat the food? That didn't ring a bell. It wasn't up until the sister called and said, hey, can somebody go in there and check on my brother to make sure he's all right? And then finally, somebody must have went up in there and be like, oh, something's going on with this man. Maybe we need to get him to the hospital. That's what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about the officer himself not catching it, because I get what you're saying on that part. Maybe a lot of people that is under the influence would probably potentially act the same way as this driver having a stroke. I could probably get your take on that, but I'm talking about afterwards, bro. You can't just be a keyboard doctor and be like, well, he wasn't on the ground and he wasn't shaking or anything like that. I don't believe him. I don't think he's gonna win. Of course he's gonna win, bro. Of course he's gonna win. Of course the city is gonna try to knock down the 10 million, but he's going to get some money. He's going to get compensation. Now, as far as what's going to happen to the officer, I don't know. I don't know what the family direction is with the officer concerned. Because again, like you said, the officer could have seen it as him being up under the influence, which he did. It's just the fact of what happened afterwards. What happened next is going to be the case. Nobody in the jail went in there to check on this gentleman to see if he was all right for 27 hours. That's a day and a half from when he got arrested, booked, and jailed. Again, during the booking, during the intake process, nobody could see that anything was going wrong when they was talking to him, gathering his information, taking his fingerprints and everything. That officer that escorted him to the jail, he couldn't tell anything. The people that was bringing the food, first, second, and third shift, morning, breakfast, you get breakfast, noon, you get lunch, And dinner. You get dinner. Nobody bothered to check on this man to see if he was all right until his sister called. And that's the facts. That's what they're going after. They may not be going after the fact that the officer thought that he was up under the influence because they basically have the same traits. But we're talking about after the fact. This man was sick and nobody bothered to come and check on his health.